So I am sharing my screen in Discord right now as well if you guys want to join that. Um, we are going to be using a log from a Dawnbringer prog, so we're doing VKA in another group. And we're basically just going to kind of go over like all the information that you can get out of a log, how to find specific things that you want, etc. First off, if anybody wants to, I guess, get into logging, the game by default will let you log. You just have to do /encounterlog in the chat box and hit enter. And then that ends up in your logs folder, which is in the same live folder that your add-ons are in. So if you need that later, I can help you find it. But basically, it stores a file there of your log, and then you can delete it later if you want to, or you can upload it. All of this information is on an external site called ESO Logs. They have their own client that you download, and then when you open that client, it lets you like upload the log from your log folder. And then once you upload that log, it is visible on the website. So let's go ahead and get into it. But basically, this is the first screen that you'll see when you get to a log. It will ask you which fight you want to look at, or you can look at all the fights as a whole. So if you look at all the fights as a whole, you click Encounters and Trash Fights. Here you'll have just a summary of everybody in the group. You'll see the damage done here, all these people in order of how much damage they've done, healing by source over here, what your deaths are to, damage taken, etc. And then if you need to know people's @names, you can find all that information here. So just on this main screen, it'll say the character's name and then the person's @name, just because the rest of the log will be under character names, and that can be a little confusing sometimes. But this is also going to show you all of the gear that the people have, all of their action bars, etc. So because this is a prog, a lot of people are switching through a lot of different skills, a lot of different gears, and whatnot. So for example, if we click on my character, opens up in a new thing. Here has my skills that I've had on each bar, and then all the different gear that I've worn. So I was in charge of Zens and Alkosh for boss fights, as well as in Kratos. But also I had a different set of gear for trash. So if you were to separate out what fights were in, it'll tell you exactly what I was wearing on that fight. But this is what I wore for the entire trial. And so you can go through like how much damage I did by ability, and then by what I got from my heals and whatnot. But this is a lot of times when you're going through logs for people and you're trying to figure out maybe what they're doing wrong or how you can help them. You can first look at their gear, make sure that everything is the right trait, make sure that they have the right enchants on it, etc. So that's just the main summary. Now, if you want to go into specific fights, for example, we have some pretty clean captain role fights. So we go in here. You can check deaths. Looks like only Dro died. I'm pretty sure that's what ruined our trifecta for the run. But you can kind of go into specifics of this fight. One thing that people will check both DPS and healers is casts. So if you go to the cast tab, you'll see cast per minute here, and it'll have how many casts per minute everybody has. If you hover over active, it'll say how many casts per minute while active. So this is mainly what you're looking at. This is kind of what I look at when I base, I guess, healer's effectiveness. So if we're trying to, level up a healer in Legion to the next rank, we'll look at, their cast per minute. That's basically how effective that they might be in combat. So if you are weaving perfectly, then you are getting a light attack and a skill each in 1 second. And so the max cast per minute you can have is 120. And so usually the DPS will be the top of the cast, and then you'll have your healers, which these two are our healers here, and then your tanks, so down here. So healers have to heavy attack every so often. Tanks are mostly blocking, so they're going to have a lot less cast per minute. But when you're looking, for example, as a healer or a DPS, how can I improve? The first thing you want to do is make sure that you're casting on global cooldown. And so cast per minute, just going to that cast tab is a very good resource to see, okay, I could be casting faster. especially as a healer. Because as a healer, your heals per second are not exactly as important as like a DPS's damage per second. So just making sure that you are casting at a pretty decent pace is going to be where you kind of start. Now you can kind of break this down even further. For example, if you want to look at your heals, you can go to let's see, let's look at Lissa, and then well, let me just actually click her name. Okay, so if we go to Lissa, you click her name or whoever's name that you want to get to, it'll show you what they're casting and how many times. And so if you're looking at somebody who's healing, for example, combat prayer. Now, combat prayer uptime, let's see. Okay, so let me just look that up. I want to say it's something like 10 seconds-ish, but I could be wrong. Yep, 10 seconds. Okay, so theoretically speaking, if combat prayer lasts for 10 seconds, you want to see that once every 10 seconds in the fight. So cast per minute, 3. And so you're probably wanting more like 6. That being said, could be different based on what fight it is, etc. If we're looking at, for example, somebody who's placing altar, that you can cast that basically once every 30 seconds. So you want to see like 2 per minute of that. But basically use this cast per minute tab to basically see how many times you're casting it per minute. Take how long the skill lasts and be like, okay, I cast it this many times per minute and it lasts this long. How often am I keeping that skill up? So that's a pretty decent way to kind of, test that. Go back. Another thing we like to do is pick out how many people resurrected in the fight. And so usually I'll go to all abilities, go to R, resurrect. What am I looking at?
No rises in that fight.
Oh, yeah, right. I guess that makes sense. We just left Dro dead. So if we go to encounters and trash fights, then we go to all abilities, resurrect. And so here's all the resurrects for the entire trial. And so it'll just say, okay, that's how many times people res. That's just a fun little metric we like to compete with each other for. But if I go back to the roll fight, okay, so yep, casts. That pretty much covers casts. Does anybody have any questions about casts specifically? Nope.
No, you were just saying you just got to figure out what your cast per minute should be based on whatever skill it is.
Right.
With how long it lasts.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, there's that. And then another tab. So when we look specifically at healers, another thing we like to look at is the healing tab. This is where you got to remember. So this is the healing tab, but we want to look at overheal. So there's a little section over here to the right, overheal. Click that. And then that'll show us exactly what your heals per second are. So raw heals per second. And so our Necromancer healer was doing 77,000, and then our Warden was doing 64,000. So that's not everything. And the reason I say it's not everything is because one of these healers is responsible for Roaring Opportunist. And then both healers are responsible for a number of buffs and debuffs that they have to keep up as well. So we'll talk about buffs and debuffs in a second. So if you're looking at like how well you're doing as a healer, raw HPS is important, but in quotation marks. So not only is raw HPS important, but your cast per minute is also important. And then later we also look at buffs and debuffs. And so speaking of buffs and debuffs, if we go to buffs, if we want to track Roaring Opportunist, for example, Roaring Opportunist gives you Major Slayer. And so we will look at specifically at the Major Slayer uptime. And so because the fight was so short, it's a pretty short graph, but because Major Slayer and Roaring Opportunist in particular casts on a heavy attack and it covers 6 people, you have to heavy attack twice when you're using that set. And so you've got, the first heavy attack starts right at the start of the fight, and then the second heavy attack starts a little tiny bit in. So she covered that. With RO, there is a little bit of downtime, so here's the downtime here, and then she heavy attacked twice again. And so that shows exactly where it is, but here's the uptimes here. So pretty much as good as you can get with RO. So 70% on the highest cast. So that's pretty good. Now, if we want to look at a different buff, Powerful Assault. So if you are running Powerful Assault, you'll come here. Powerful Assault is cast whenever you use a Powerful Assault skill. So that would probably be Vigor in this case. I don't remember who exactly was running it, but they got pretty good uptimes. Between 60 to 80% for everybody. And how many people you hit is entirely based on where they're standing, if they're close enough to you, if they're dead at the time that you cast it, etc. So like the uptime on Major Slayer for Dro is only at about 50%. That's because he died and nobody rezzed him. Yeah, and see, Powerful Assault went down on him here as well because he died. So your uptimes are going to be better based on, you know, how many people are alive to get them, etc. So some other uptimes, you know, Major Force. This one comes from Horn. Horn uptimes. That's just, you know, us rotating our people using Horn. All of these uptimes here, just, you know, the 100% ones that just kind of stick around from people. So Spalder of Ruin, whoever was running it, ran it the entire fight, so that's good. Zahn, whoever was running Zahn, that's up. Buffs. Zen's redress. Okay, so that's all of our buffs as a group. If we go to debuffs, that's where we get into other things. Now, when you go to debuffs, you want to look at the debuffs on the enemies. Okay, so you switch from friendlies to enemies. I don't know if you guys can see my mouse very well. So yeah, Minor Magic of Steel, that comes from your Ellie susceptibility, so that means that 100% uptime. Whoever used it kept it up. Minor Maim comes from Heroic Slash, probably some other sources as well. Taunt, basically 100% uptime, etc. Just as we go through. Now, if you want to look specifically at who's providing what, this is where we can do change all sources to, like, for example, my character. And so I was running Zen. Zen is pretty easy to keep up. This is just you put 5 dots on the enemy and then you keep those dots up and it takes 5% more damage from everybody. So touches Zen, 92%. That's pretty standard that I see almost every single fight. And the reason being is I just have to build that up real quick and then it keeps on going for the rest of the fight. Another one, Line Breaker. So Line Breaker is Alkosh. Line Breaker / Roar of Alkosh. They appear as 2 separate things, but Alkosh gives the Line Breaker debuff, and what that does is it reduces the armor of the enemies, thus increasing everybody else's penetration. But to track that Line Breaker, you see it is at 47%. This is going to be based on how many synergies I get from other people, as well as when I hit them. So as long as I'm hitting them at a decent amount of time, this number could be higher. I've seen it as high as about 71%. But it is kind of based on, you know, who's giving me synergies, where I'm getting them from. So not really a whole lot I can do about that, but pretty decent numbers there. And then, yeah, you just look specifically at your debuffs. We can look at, for example, the main tank. So that would be Musty. So, you know, Taunt, 100%, obviously going to be up there pretty high. Looks like he was doing some stagger there. Breach, vulnerability. The vulnerability is from his Colossus, so whenever he used that, it was up. And whatnot. A lot of, you know, tracking these buffs is just knowing what you're looking for. So if you want to come in and be like, all right, I want to know my Crusher uptime, then you come in. If I want to change who I'm looking at for Crusher, I'm not entirely sure who all was running Crusher. So let's just look at all of it. Yeah, so Crusher is going to be about 100% because you've got multiple people in the group running it. But basically, you can use these tools to change the source of who's doing the debuff. And then also you can look specifically for certain abilities if you need to. But that's buffs and debuffs is where you're going to check for like your sets and how often you're keeping those up. Does anybody have any questions about buffs or debuffs?
Nope.
Okay. Yeah, that one is if it looks weird, then you just have to switch between friendlies or enemies. So there's that. Now if we go to like damage taken, this is where you can get into you know, how much damage you took and when. So let's see. That's for the enemies, obviously. But if you want to see people taking damage to meteors, that's where people start taking damage to meteors, which is the second half of the roll fight. I like to look at the death screen as well, especially when we're looking at progging. Maybe not particularly for this fight, but let's see how many people died on Yondu. Nobody? Interesting. I guess Dro really did ruin it at Vroll. Had some Fallgraven deaths here, but it's helpful to see what's killing people in a prog. Quick Strike looks like Kalissa took a light attack from one of the enemies. Rip. But what's this loading? Here we go. Look at total deaths. And then what's killing people. Okay. You can kind of see like what percentage of the fight you lived through before you died. You can also look at interrupts if you need to. That would be more for a fight like Asylum Sanctorium where you do have to interrupt things. There's some interrupting here too, but it's not super important to track. Resources. One really cool feature of this of the logs is if you pick a specific fight, you can do a replay of it. So if I go back to the Captain Vroll fight, there's a button to the right here. It says replay. Okay, you can click it, and if you hit play, it will show everybody in the fight moving around as they are. So DPS here, boss here. This is Musty, main tanking, healer, and healer, and our off tank. And then as the ads come in, you'll see they will move in and we'll, round them up and kill them. But this is you can track like who's standing on top of people they shouldn't be, etc. Kind of watching a replay in Asylum Sanctorium is kind of fun because you get to see people like kiting in their lanes or whether they are kiting in their lanes properly. But this is pretty neat information. I don't know if it shows anybody with a specific icon when they die, but that's probably, yeah. Doesn't say that he's dead, but he's dead there. So it's pretty neat that it tracks that information. So yeah, let's see, deaths. Okay, like if you want to look at, specific deaths, we can see like, what killed this person. Here, Dragon's Breath. Oh, dragon totem. I'm like, why are there dragon breaths in VKA? So yeah, the dragon totem killed him. But you can see here that he took quite a few ticks from that. It looks like probably both totems were facing at him. And then he took healing from the healer on his side, but it wasn't quite enough. He died. And he was not blocking. But yeah, a lot of it is just knowing like what time you died at to look at what it was. One other add-on that I like to use in-game to kind of track that information is Lilith's Group Manager. There is a death tab, and you can just hover over your name, and it'll say all the damage that you took and whether you blocked it or not. But yeah, that is basically how to read the logs. Does anybody have any questions?
Besides buffs and debuffs,
Mhm.
what else should I be looking at for tanks?
So for tanks, buffs and debuffs are basically going to be your biggest things that people are looking at. It doesn't really matter like how much healing you're doing. Definitely doesn't matter how much damage you're doing. It's going to be that you're going to know if you're staying alive or not. It's super easy, looking at deaths, whether you're surviving or not. But other than that, just making sure that your gear is correct in the logs as well, making sure that your skills are correct. But it pretty much is just buffs and debuffs as a tank. So.
Okay.
Yeah, keeping up taunt, keeping up your skills, keeping up whatever debuffs that you're wearing, etc.
And cast per minute for heals.
Yep. In terms of like casting for tanks, super not important as long as you're keeping up your up times and then also surviving. Like most people could care less what your casts are looking like because you're blocking a lot, you're dodge rolling a lot, doesn't matter. But for healers, cast per minute definitely is pretty important to look at. So like if we're seeing numbers below like 60, then we're starting to wonder, are you casting as quickly as you could be? But tanks are always going to have pretty low casts. And like I said, if you hover over the active, it'll say what your CPM was while you were active. So it'll be a little different than what it says here. Cool. But that's pretty much it. Does anybody have any questions on like how to find certain things or?
It was really good, thank you.
Yep, it's like a ton of information. It's just pretty like daunting when you first open it, like where to look and how to improve. But that's pretty much the gist of how to improve and where to look for those things. So yeah,